Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 22nd ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He covers the Washington Wizards for Post Sports. Let me welcome Varun Shankar to the show. It's great to have you on.
Matthew, happy to be on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
It's a good question. I was probably like 10 years old, I think. Um, John Feinstein wrote these young adult novels about high school aged, middle school or high school aged journalists who somehow were able to cover, like the Super Bowl, the World Series, that kind of a thing. And every single time they would uncover some kind of mystery. And I remember thinking, oh, you can go to sports games and get paid to write about them? Oh, this is great because I liked writing, I like sports, and I was like, this is a great way to merge all these things. And it kind of just started from there, to be honest.
Yeah, and of course, last night the Wizards took a 139 to 130 loss against the San Antonio Spurs. Washington is now on a six-game losing streak. What were some of your main takeaways from that matchup?
Victor Wembanyama, he is everything you want, like everything you expect and more. Watching him pregame, like he just looks fake. He doesn't look like a real person, you know. I was joking with my dad. I was telling him this is mankind 2.0. This guy is the first edition of the next evolution, because no one should be allowed to be as tall, as lanky, as long armed, but move the way that he does. He's a special athlete. He's truly one of a kind in a way that doesn't exist. Like, we say one of a kind for so many different players, but he really is. I don't think there's anyone else on earth who looks and moves like he does. He's fantastic, and watching him put up 50 points and set a career high, it was legitimately a one of the coolest experiences of my young career to be able to be in the arena for that kind of an event.
Now, how much of that 50-point performance would you say has to, how much do you have to blame the Wizards defense versus just how good Wemby is and he can't be stopped, really?
It's a mix of both. I mean, I don't think the Wizards defense is, a top tier unit or anything like that, but he had a lot of tough shots. You got to when you're facing a player like that, you're not going to be able to take everything away from him, and so you have to give him something. And in this case, the Wizards seemed pretty content to let him take 3-point shots. Not, they weren't leaving him wide open, but they were not closing out very aggressively because they know you close out aggressively, he has to take two steps in his arms at the rim. Um, and this was a night where he set career highs in both 3-point attempts and makes. When that happens, there just isn't a way to stop him.
Yeah, and last night was just a crazy night in terms of points. Of course, Wemby had this performance. Giannis, Karl Anthony Towns did amazing. Even Jared McCain. But another player, obviously, Jordan Poole, has been on fire to start the season. He had a 40-point performance last night and is now averaging 22 points per game on the year. What have you seen from him? That's an improvement from the Jordan Poole we saw last year. I know a lot of Wizards fans were kind of skeptical um, after seeing him last year and what he really brought to the team. How would you see he's improved this season?
Yeah, Pool. It's funny you mentioned this because I legitimately filed a story about this earlier today, and it has not published yet, but it should publish in the either later today or tomorrow. And it's a lot of different things, but I think one of the biggest things is he's more comfortable. This is not someone who enjoys being in new environments and unfamiliar environments, and I think that's something that took a toll on him at times last year. And he's just, I think he's been unlocked because they're playing him more at point guard. I think he's just more comfortable, and I think he's just feeling better all around.
And obviously, his shooting splits have been a lot better this year as well compared to last year. Do you see a potential long-term fit for him in this on this Wizards roster in the future?
Yeah, 100%. I think he's really young. He's still only 25. So when you look at the age range for the potential players, the Wizards, the really young pieces they have, he's obviously a little bit older than your Alex Sars, your Bilal Koulibalys, your Keyshawn Georges, your Bo Carringtons, but he's not old by any stretch of the imagination. He's 25. He's a pre-prime player, and if he continues this kind of play, there's no reason that he can't be a part of this team for years to come.
So far this season, Alex R has averaged just under 10 points per game to go along with 6 rebounds and 2.3 blocks. However, he is shooting just 34% from the field, as well as 17% from beyond the arc. Although I don't think it's necessarily fair to judge a rookie on shooting percentage just 10 games into their career. What would you say has impressed you the most, though, based on what you've seen from him?
Yeah, his defense started out extremely strong. I don't think it's been as impactful in the last couple of games, but you can see the outlines of a upper level NBA defender already. He's a really good shot blocker. His rim defense is pretty good, and depending on what you're looking at, really good. And he has what really separates him is the fact that he has the foot speed and athleticism to switch out to players at the perimeter, and that just gives Washington so many different options for how it wants to contain modern NBA offenses.
Yeah, and a player who has also been a little disappointing, in my opinion, at least so far this season, is Corey Kispert. While he is averaging double-digit points, but he's shooting just 30% from beyond the arc, and I mean that's a big problem considering the fact that we're basically paying him $54 million to knock down threes. If this shooting slump does continue, at what point do the Wizards begin to panic?
I don't think the Wizards are going to panic, and I don't think Kispert is going to panic because I just don't think this shooting slump is going to last too long, to be honest. I talked to Corey about this somewhat recently, and one thing that's really interesting with shooters and with players who have staked their careers on doing something that's inherently volatile is that I don't know if all of them see this, but for Corey in particular, he understands that this is a volatile thing. He understands that there's just going to be a 2 week stretch where shots don't fall for him. And we're in that 2 week stretch right now, but I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I think he shot really well against San Antonio. And I talked to him a couple games ago after he had a pretty tough shooting performance, and I asked him, "Is this a mechanical issue? Is this a technique thing, a form thing, or shots just not falling?" He said shots aren't falling. And I also asked him, "How do you approach preparing when you're in the middle of slumps like this?" And he says, "If I know I'm doing something wrong, I have a host of trusted people. If the ball's coming off funny, if I don't feel right when I'm shooting, I have a whole group of trusted people that I can lean on for advice and to break down the film with all that stuff. But if you're doing everything right and sometimes the shots just aren't falling, it's just bad luck sometimes, at that point, and I think this is honestly good advice for life in general, he just steps back. He unplugs from basketball. He tries to think about other things, and he is able to do that, I think, because he has an inner confidence that the shots are going to fall eventually, and that you get that first off by his repetitions and how much work he puts into his shot, but also because he's done this before. He's hit a lot of shots over his career, you know?
Yeah, and last night against the Spurs, he attempted 9 three-pointers, made 5 of them, 56%. So hopefully he's working his way out of that slump. Now, an interesting topic that there's a lot to talk about in this topic. It's kind of that small forward battle, I guess you could call it, between Kuzma and Keyshawn George. I think there's two different perspectives where obviously we want Kuzma to, we want to get better trade value out of him, of course, if we do end up trading him, which it looks like we will. But then also, I think that the Wizards want to lean into their youth and use Keyshawn George a lot. They had a lineup earlier this season, and it was Poole, Carrington, Koulibaly, George, and Sarr. That was their starting lineup. And the Wizards PR team sent out something. That average lineup was 21.06 years old, which is just really hard to fathom. Do you think that the Wizards should be using George or Kuzma in the starting lineup?
I think it's fine to use Kyle. I think he has had a tough start to the season. He would tell you that as well. Part of that is just that he's coming back from injury. And I think he was not in the best rhythm as since he's been back from injury. And I think that's just something that's going to come with time. This is a guy who's a very impressive player at his peak. When he's at his best, he is someone who was a key piece of a championship level team. And youth is great and getting experience for youth is great, but you want to make sure that you're building good habits. And I do think there's some value that Kuzma adds just from being a veteran presence and saying, "Hey, this is how you're supposed to do it. This is how you're supposed to prepare," and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and of course, I feel like Kuzma fits into the to the Wizards players who have looked good on paper, but have definitely struggled with efficiency so far this season. Say the Wizards do move on from him at the deadline. Do you think that a first rounder is still in the cards for them?
I think so. I think that he has a skill set that's so malleable. He can fit into any team, basically, either at the three or the four, depending on what they need. He can shoot, he can defend, he can score by himself, he can move off the ball, he can pass decently, he's driving, he's doing all these things, and he's really that Swiss Army knife on a really good team. I think he's a little overextended as a number one option, but that's a thing that maybe 10 guys in the league can do at an exceptional level. So yeah, I think he could fetch a first. I think he'd have to play a little bit better to fetch more than that, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just in general, a lot of teams could use him in a much
Exactly.
different role. Like I know the Miami Heat was a team that was looking at Kuzma. Of course, they're a potential contending team if they do have him. Still, Adebayo is pretty young. Jimmy Butler is great in the playoffs, so that'd be interesting. But us with our young team that we have, I don't know if he necessarily is the best fit. And I know we were talking about the defensive problems a little earlier. The Wizards this season allow 123 points per game, which is actually the most in the NBA. What adjustments do you think have to be made on the defensive side of the ball in order to limit opposing teams' offensive productivity?
Yeah, part of that number I think is going to be skewed by last night, and also part of that number is skewed by how fast Washington plays. They want to run to make their offense a little bit easier, and I think that can have downstream negative effects on their defense. But they're bad even if you look at the defensive rating, which accounts for pace. Um, The defense is gonna be a work in progress all season long. A lot of that is just because when you're playing young players and you're trying to integrate a bunch of pieces, the communication is always there. Some of these guys don't have, fully formed NBA bodies yet. They haven't been in NBA weight programs and, fitness regimens for their whole careers. Um, yeah, I think it's gonna be, a work in progress for a lot of it, but one thing that's been somewhat encouraging is that they are forcing opponents to miss shots. I don't think the opposing team's, effective field goal percentage or anything like that is particularly high. A big issue has been rebounding. Part of that is, Alex Sarr playing at center has not been able to be a effective defensive rebounder. They've given up a lot of offensive rebounds when he's on the court, but that's something that's gonna improve in time, and that's the kind of thing that you wanna get through and get those struggles done this year because then hopefully you learn and you're better for it in the future.
And now another guy I want to kind of talk about a little bit is Johnny Davis. Of course, Davis he's struggled a lot in his first 2 seasons, and then there was some noise this offseason, obviously, that he was, fixing his jump shot, wasn't gonna let anyone adjust it, and he did have a solid preseason. I believe it was a game winner against the Knicks, and, I thought that he might have a elevated role this season. He hasn't really had that yet. 8 minutes per game, I wouldn't say struggled in the time that he's played, but hasn't gotten enough to really prove himself yet. What's his role on this team, now and in the future?
I don't think there is much of one, to be honest. And the Wizards made that clear, I think, earlier this season when they declined his option for next year. So he will be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. It's a crowded guard room for the Wizards, right? You've got Poole, you've got Carrington, you've got Keyshawn George if you qualify him as a guard, you've got Kispert, you've got Koulibaly. That's five players right there. And I'm not even including Malcolm Brogdon, who's in injury, or Jared Butler, who's one of the most reliable players on the team. It's a tough battle for Johnny to get minutes. And, you know, the Wizards have been pretty clear just from the fact that they didn't pick up that contract extension that they don't see him as a part of their long term future as of right now. And things can obviously change, but as of right now, that's the case.
And then also looking at Bub Carrington, of course, we traded away Denny in a deal that got us the 14th pick that ended up being Carrington and Malcolm Brogdon. Is that trade a no-brainer 100 or not 100, A plus in your mind?
It's tough to say. It's so early in Carrington's career. He looks really promising so far, and Denny has not had a good start to the season, but Denny is someone who's still pretty young and is on a reasonable contract. There's a lot of room down the line for this to swing in either direction. It's going to depend on how Carrington develops long term. I will say that it was interesting to me. This draft was largely considered to be a weak class, this past draft. And the Wizards chose to double down on it by making the Denny trade and getting that extra pick. I wonder what that signals about how they value draft picks versus quality of draft class moving forward.
Yeah, and tomorrow the Wizards will face off on the road against the Atlanta Hawks at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The Hawks are currently 7th in the East at 5-7. What are the keys to victory for Washington in this matchup?
Yeah, Washington's only 2 wins of the year have come against Atlanta, and, both times I've really liked seeing Bilal Coulibaly take on Trae Young. Koulibaly's length and athleticism make him an impact defender every night, and he's tasked with doing that every night, and, he really gave Trae fits whenever he was able to get on him, but he wasn't able to guard Trae that much in the second game that they played against Atlanta because he got some fouls. So that's one thing I'm going to look at. Can Koulibaly guard without fouling? Trey's really good at drawing fouls. Can Koulibaly stay on the court, basically? And then on the other end, can the Wizards, well, also, can the Wizards keep the Hawks off the glass? That's obviously a huge concern for Washington all season long. And then can the Wizards generate good 3-point looks and knock them down?
And then obviously Koulibaly has looked incredible this season, without a doubt one of the Wizards' best players. Do you think we have a future star in our hands with him?
It's tough to say. I don't know how good he can be as of right now. And I don't say that's a knock on Bilal, but he's shown definite flashes of being an impact player through his first 2 years. I think his first year was more like, oh, this is interesting. And now you're really like, okay, you're starting to see the picture come together. He's shooting really well at the rim. He's a much better dribbler. He's a much better shooter. Everything has gotten a lot better. Now the question for me becomes, how much better is it? And how much can he consistently be a attacking player and a scorer? Because he's someone right now who some games he puts up 10, 15 shots and he's got 20 points, but there's a lot of games where he's in the single digits for shot attempts, including I think against the Spurs, and there's an inherent aggression that's not always there.
And just the other day, the Wizards announced their new city jerseys. I have to ask, what are your initial thoughts on the new uniforms?
I like these a lot. I did not like the version that they had last year, where it was the gray and black ones with the
Yeah.
red script.
Mhm.
This year, most of it's just I really love the. I think I can't remember what they call it. I think hydrogen blue is what they call it. I love the color. Um, I think it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the one last year was just kind of a little out of fit, didn't really make that much sense. Definitely like how this one has looked on the rookies, at least in the photos that we've seen so far. Now, we do have one final question to ask before we do wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
I would say make sure you love the journalism as much as you love the sports. There are going to be a lot of people who dissuade you from entering this industry for somewhat valid reasons. The hours are long, the job security isn't great, the pay isn't exceptional, and those are all things for you and for other aspiring sports journalists to think about. And they were things that I thought about as I tried to get into this. But and if you just love sports and if you just love being around sports, I don't think long term you will be able to find the drive to do this day after day. But if you love the sports and you also love the journalism, you love talking to people, you love doing interviews like this, you love putting stuff out there for people, then there's more to it and there's more for you to really tap into as you go through some of the tougher parts of this job. And I'll also say that if you want to do this and you feel like you have to, like, I feel like I have to do this job in a lot of ways. Like, this is what I was made to do in a lot of ways. And if you feel that way as well, you should go for this 1,000%. But just make sure that you do want that.
Yeah, absolutely. With that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do
Of course.
appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
Get a second degree if you can in college. That's the other one. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was great to talk. Really love the work you're doing. I think it's really great to see.
And where can the people watching find your work if they want to?
Yes, I'm on. Let's see, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit at by Varun Shankar. That's ByVarunShankar. You can also find my work at WashingtonPost.com/sports. I should probably know that URL a little more off the top of my head.
Yeah, again, with that being said, I can't thank Varun Shankar enough for being the 22nd ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.